Welcome to the Chronicles of Rome, Episode 5, The Conflict of the Orders. The Republic divided. Rome had cast off kings. It had founded a republic. But beneath its proud new institutions, division remained. A republic governed by law, yes, but a law that served only some. The Roman people were not one. From the earliest years of the Republic, they were divided into two great classes, the Patricians and the Plebeians. The Patricians claimed descent from the original Curiae, the founding clans of Rome. Their families traced their lines back to Romulus, or so they claimed. They alone could hold the highest religious and political offices. They interpreted the laws, controlled the priesthoods, and filled the ranks of the Senate. The Republic may have ended monarchy, but it preserved aristocracy. The plebeians were everyone else, the farmers who worked the land, the craftsmen who built Rome's walls, the tradesmen, the foot soldiers. Some were wealthy, even prominent, but birth, not merit, determined access to power. These were the men who carried Rome's burdens, yet reaped few of its honors. At first, this divide was bearable. The Republic was young, its institutions evolving, but in time, strain turned to anger. War was constant. Rome fought almost yearly against neighboring tribes, the Volsi, Aequi, and Sabines. Plebeians were conscripted, forced to leave their farms and families, and when they returned, they found their lands untended, their debts unpaid, and creditors waiting. Roman debt law was ruthless. Under the contract system known as nexum, a debtor could pledge his body as collateral. If he failed to repay, he could be imprisoned, publicly humiliated, even sold into slavery. One veteran, Livy tells us, returned from war only to be shackled in the forum. He stood naked, his body scarred by both battle and the whip of his creditor. He lifted his chains and cried, "Behold the reward of Roman service." The Senate, dominated by patricians, offered no remedy. And so in 494 BCE, the plebeians revolted, not with weapons, but with absence. They left the city, they walked out of Rome, marched to a hill beyond the Anio River, and made camp. This was the Mons Sacer, the sacred mountain. It was a symbolic retreat, a collective refusal to support a republic that would not protect them. Rome froze. The legions were empty. The markets were closed. The city stood, proud but paralyzed. The Senate sent envoys, among them a respected elder, Menenius Agrippa. He didn't argue law. He told a parable. Once the limbs of the body rebelled against the stomach. They worked, they moved, they bore the weight. The stomach, they said, did nothing, so they refused to feed it. But the body weakened, the limbs failed. Only then did they see the stomach nourish them all. It was elegant, patronizing, and effective. The plebeians returned, but not without gain. They gained something no people in Rome had ever had, elected representatives who could stand between them and the power of the state. The tribunes of the plebs. At first, there were 2, later 10, elected annually by the plebeian assembly and answerable only to it. The tribunes had one great power, the intercession, the veto. They could block any official action they deemed harmful to a plebeian. But more than that, they were sacrosanct. The people swore a lex sacrata, a sacred oath, to defend them. Any man who harmed a tribune could be killed on the spot without penalty. Their persons were inviolable, their authority divine. Their office was not housed in the Senate or any patrician-controlled building. Instead, they sat on the steps of the Temple of Ceres on the Aventine Hill, a symbol of plebeian autonomy. With the tribunes came the plebeian aediles, custodians of public records, temples, and marketplaces. They managed grain supplies, maintained order, and ensured fair trade. They were modest offices at first, but they became pillars of plebeian power. The Republic had changed, but not enough. Rome's laws still lived in shadow. They were unwritten, inherited through custom, and controlled by a privileged few. Only the patricians knew the legal precedents. Only the priests understood the sacred calendars and auspices. Justice could be twisted. It could be delayed, concealed, or denied. The plebeians demanded clarity. And so, in the year 451 BCE, the Senate agreed to a bold experiment. For the first time in Rome's history, the normal magistracies were suspended. In their place, a panel of 10 men, the decemviri legibus scribundis, would be appointed to draft a body of written laws for all Romans. 10 men to write the law. 10 men to make justice visible. They weren't drawn solely from the patrician class, nor were they all plebeians. They were chosen for their wisdom, for their integrity, at least in theory. For a year, the decemviri ruled. They drafted 10 tablets of law, and these were displayed publicly in the forum. The people approved. But the work wasn't finished. A second board followed, and 2 more tablets were added. Together, they became the 12 tables. They were posted near the Comitium in the heart of the city, carved into bronze and mounted in view of all. They covered contracts, property rights, legal procedure, inheritance, debt, and punishment. Harsh by later standards, often cruel, but clear. And above all, public. Now, for the first time, every Roman, whether patrician or plebeian, could see the rules that governed them. Fathers taught their sons to recite the laws by heart. Schoolchildren repeated them aloud in lessons. The 12 tables were no longer just law. They were memory. They were tradition. They were Rome. But power, once grasped, is rarely surrendered easily. The second board of Decemvirs refused to step down. At their head was Appius Claudius, once admired for his leadership. Now he ruled with arrogance and fear, and then he went too far. Appius Claudius saw a young plebeian girl, Virginia. She was the daughter of Lucius Virginius, a respected army officer. She was engaged to be married, admired for her virtue and beauty. Appius claimed she was a slave. He ordered her seized. When her father heard the news, he rushed from the military camp back to the city. He found his daughter surrounded by guards, pleading for help. He appealed to the court, begged for justice. But the Decemvirs, loyal to Appius, refused him. And so in the forum, before the eyes of the Roman people, Virginius drew a knife and took his daughter's life. "This is the only way I can keep you free," he said. The city erupted. Crowds surged into the streets. The tribunes returned from exile. The decemvirs were overthrown. Appius Claudius was imprisoned. Some said he took his own life in disgrace. The Republic had been shaken, but it endured, and the 12 tables, their judgments harsh, their values unyielding, remained. Still, the struggle for equality was far from over. Just a few years later, in 445 BCE, a new battle emerged. Not in the forum, but in the private realm of family and marriage. By law, patricians and plebeians could not intermarry. The barrier was not merely social, it was legal, designed to preserve patrician bloodlines, religious privileges, and political power. The tribune Gaius Canuleius rose to challenge it. His question cut to the heart of the matter. If we can die for the Republic, he asked, why can we not marry into it? The Senate responded with outrage. Some senators warned that the gods themselves would be angered by such unions, that Rome would suffer ruin if the classes were allowed to mix, but the people stood firm. The Lex Canuleia passed. Intermarriage between patricians and plebeians became legal. And with that simple act, the first cracks appeared in the walls of patrician privilege. The journey toward equality would be long, and it would not be easy. But with each law, each tribune, and each peaceful protest, the Republic was being reshaped. The plebeians were no longer silent. They were organized, determined. They had their own assembly, the Concilium Plebis, which began passing resolutions known as plebiscita. At first, they applied only to plebeians. But the precedent had been set. Soon, plebeians would demand the right to hold consulship, to serve as censors, and even to enter the sacred priesthoods. Some efforts would fail, others would succeed. But the tide had turned. Rome was no longer a city ruled solely by birth. It had become a place where the law could be contested, where rights could be claimed, and where power, slowly but surely, began to bend toward inclusion. Next time, we leave the forum and return to the field of battle. Rome still faced enemies beyond its walls, and one of its most legendary clashes came at Lake Regillus, where the young Republic fought not just the Latin League, but, according to legend, encountered gods on the battlefield. But remember this, Rome was not born equal. It had to be argued, it had to be vetoed, it had to be marched for, and it had to be written down in bronze. The conflict of the orders was not a civil war. It was a civil demand, and it forged the Roman Republic in fire and in principle. This has been the Chronicles of Rome. Join us next time as we take up arms once more at the Battle of Lake Regillus.